Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us this week as we do a little bit of double duty. We missed a fallout last week, so I'm going to get into a few takeaways from last week's Houston match before diving into the preview of FC Dallas. And in between, we've got some news, mostly good news, unlike last week, so that's a nice change of pace. Let's dive right into it, though, as we look back a little bit into that Houston Dynamo match, which another disappointing, unfortunate 3-2 loss. Let's start with where we usually do on Fallout as we missed that. The consistent lineup was more or less back. Roman Berkey, Devin Padelford, Timo Baumgartel, Henry Kessler, Conrad Vollum was the goalkeeper and the back line. Alfredo Morales and Edu Leuven, central midfielders. Marcel Hartl, Tomas Ostrak, Songbin Jong, and Klaus up front with only Alfredo Morales as the difference maker with this match versus the previous week against Vancouver. Now, this is noteworthy because David Critchley was asked post-game to that match, why no Phill Fall? Where is he? Why is he no longer starting? The Canadian visa issues don't exist anymore. And it basically went back to consistency when you're having success in what you can control on those lineup decisions, boiling down to 0 goals allowed in the run of play against Vancouver, and David Critchley at least wanted to have consistency when possible. And this has been a problem for St. Louis all season, finding consistency in the lineup. And last week, we talked about consistency when it came to the attack, and before last weekend, the midfield and the attack, where you had Chris Durkin, Edu Leuven, Marcel Hartl, Tomas Ostrak, Songbin Jong, and Klaus as your front six. This match kept that back line intact. It kept the forwards and the midfielders intact, and it just swapped out Alfredo Morales for Chris Durkin, who we saw later in the match. It was also said by David Critchley post-game to this match that Phill Fall will be in contention, so we will talk plenty more about Phill Fall here in just a little bit, I promise. But some other comments that David Critchley had after this game do a pretty good job of summing up what all went wrong or what all went down in this game, at least. Critchley commented in the middle of this week that he was heartened by the fact that we were, in his words, number 2 in the league or number 2 in the country, he said, in a few key stats: expected goals created, possession, field tilt, deep progressive passes. We were 6th without the ball in other statistics in MLS and in the country. So the problem wasn't necessarily the game planning, it seemed. The problem wasn't chances generated overall. And you do have to, I think, say a caveat to some of these stats is that depending on your source of some of these stats, I think that's where Critchley gets some of these numbers. If you look at MLS Analytics, for instance, on Blue Sky, which we do a lot for this show and other shows do the same because of the ease of publicly available data, we didn't fare too well when it comes to expected goals in the top elite tier of MLS this past week. Possession getting turned into field tilt, getting turned into chances created. They all play together. What St. Louis did in this match, whether you say we were number 2, number 6, number 10, or whatnot, what St. Louis did in this match was consistently have high possession, consistently enter the final third. So the field tilt was at minimum 50-50, depending on your stats and where you get them from. But the XG created from all of that possession, from the field tilt, it didn't quite equal, in my opinion, what you want to do if you're having high numbers in some of these areas. St. Louis historically has done a pretty good job of creating XG with low possession numbers and with low field tilt numbers. We've talked in this show a few times the difference in kind of how I put it, quantity versus quality of field tilt, where you don't have to dominate the percent of field tilt to have quality touches in the final third. And the team we're going to preview in a little bit here, FC Dallas, really gets to that, where they're a counterattack based team. They are low possession, but their goal isn't to dominate field tilt necessarily. It's to create meaningful chances in the few opportunities that they enter the final third with how their game state, how their game flow develops in that counterattack. St. Louis right now, in a lot of ways, this Houston game was a good example of St. Louis struggling to find that consistent identity against a team that was more than willing to let us have possession and create that mid block that really forced us to work around them and between them. And we were not successful in a lot of different ways as they fell back into their final third. The only way we really created a lot of really quality chances was in transition. And so for St. Louis to be having a massive amount of field tilt, a high possession, it limited the ways that we could create that transition and pull them out of that block that they were in their defensive third, in their defensive half of the field. The overall chances, not as many as I would have liked to see against Houston. And the biggest problem, though, to me, wasn't necessarily the chances created, because you could argue we did a pretty good job of creating chances. And if you're David Critchley, you did argue that. He said this week that he thought we could have turned our chances into 5 or 6 goals. And I kind of see it. I see how we did that in a few different opportunities. And the Klaus sitter from Songbin Jong was the perfect example of that, where you are missing a lot of really easy opportunities in the run of play like this. And the pass that Songbin had to Klaus is starting to be a quintessential type play that we see from Songbin down that right side. Yeah, he's got the speed, he beats the defenders, he has the perfect touch and pace with his passes, and he gets them into a spot where Klaus can retrieve them and has a good angle at goal. And Klaus does have a lot of creativity that he offers in receiving some of these passes. He showed it with a recent goal, I believe against Vancouver, but with this pass in particular in this Houston game that cost us a goal in the first half, I think it was, that was disappointing. A few other opportunities that we squandered, but I tend to agree that while I do want to see more XG, I do want to see more shots and better chances, we can't continue to squander the chances that we're creating. That it leads to the slow start that we had. It leads to some of the mental lapses that we saw when we can't get out in front early, even if we create enough chances. Houston had, I think, the first 4 shots in the game, first 4 or 5 shots in the game. We took a while to get into the flow of this match. And when you take a while, you allow some of these opportunities that are not really what you consider in the run of play to really dominate the storyline. You allow a set piece goal. You allow an own goal when you have one of those defensive lapses like Henry Kessler did. And then you get into the second half of this match, you make your substitutions, and you have more mental lapses. Phill Fall's error in this match that is probably dominating a lot of the takeaways from Houston is one of the most frustrating giveaways that I can recall. And it has nothing to do with tactics. It has nothing to do with game planning. It has nothing to do with the people that David Critchley had on the field, the options that he chose. It has to do with Phill Fall being lackadaisical, being almost showboaty in what he appeared to be taking at ease, a back turn towards the keeper and just losing control of the ball. Whatever you want to describe it as, it can't happen again. Not just because Phill Fall is a $3.5-4 million signing, not just because he's supposed to be our center back of the future. He's supposed to be a professional footballer, and you can't make those kinds of mistakes in Major League Soccer or any professional league. That's unacceptable. So Phill Fall has to learn from that mistake, and I think he will. David Critchley had his comments post-game immediately after that, noting, and we'll talk about the lineup towards the end of this episode for FC Dallas, but noting that Phill Fall is going to be a candidate for starting against FC Dallas. One mistake does not make the person. And so Phill Fall learning from this and moving on has to happen. And I think we've harped on that enough. But the takeaway from this is it's the 3rd loss in a row. And it's tied for the most consecutive losses under David Critchley, no matter how it happened. It's the 2nd time that we've lost 3 in a row, and we're in the middle of the 3rd time we've lost at least 2 straight under Critchley. These losing streaks are becoming more commonplace. So the fact that we had goals, and the goal of the week, no doubt, by Edu Leuven, that one goal of the match day, we had that worldie and a great pass from Simon Betcher. We had Mackay Joyner's first Major League Soccer goal. These are positives in the second half, but when you make the mistakes in the first half, when you're not able to take advantage of that opportunity that Klaus had, among others, plus the set piece defense, again, failing St. Louis City, the mistake by Henry Kessler, you make, and Phill Fall, all 3 of those I would consider mistakes that St. Louis has to learn from individually by 2 center backs, but also team-based. The biggest thing, and I've got this later on too, biggest thing that I'm concerned about right now is our set piece defense. It is failing us. It is leaking goals like crazy. And when that happens early with any of these mental lapses, you're putting yourself so far behind that 2 goals in the span of 5 minutes by Leuven and Joyner wasn't enough. You cannot keep putting yourself in that position. And that's probably my ultimate takeaway from this match. That's honestly enough. I don't want to do a full fallout on this. I didn't want to do a massive deep dive because we're starting to see consistent stories here of overall fairly good matches comparatively, but you have these little moments that make the entire thing, and they should be moments that should not happen. They should be givens that we're not going to score an own goal. They should be givens that we can shore up our set piece defense. So we move forward. But in the interim, before we move forward, we do have some positives to talk about. There is a couple of things that happened this week that I think are noteworthy. We have to give some flowers to, and those would be international team call-ups. Mekhi Joyner to the U.S. under-20s and Songbin Jeong to the South Korean national team. First of all, Mekhi Joyner was called up to the U.S. U20 men's national team camp in West Palm Beach, Florida, taking place from September 1st through the 9th. So he is currently there as you're listening to this. The training camp will be held by Rob Valentino, and it is Mekhi Joyner's fourth call-up to the youth national team, any level, with the United States. Joyner has made 7 appearances with the team so far this season, was recently added to the city supplemental roster, so he will be eligible for play once he comes back for St. Louis City the rest of the season. And we wish Mekhi the best, and we cannot wait to get him back. The unfortunate thing about the timing of this is that the next person that we give flowers to is Songbin Jeong. Songbin Jeong was called up to the South Korean national team for their upcoming friendlies, one of which is against the United States on Saturday, September 6th, where South Korea will face the U.S. at Sports Illustrated Stadium in Harrison, New Jersey. Songbin receives his second call-up to this national team and had scored his first senior international goal in his debut match, a 5-0 win over Sri Lanka during the 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifiers. So it's not hard to make the leap of saying Songbin has benefited so much from this trade to St. Louis that the opportunity to play and the quality that he's shown is leading directly to his national team call-up. So fantastic work by Songbin, fantastic work by City, fantastic work by Lutz Pfannenstiel to make this happen. That is an underlying theme of Songbin getting called up. If Lutz didn't pull the trigger to bring Songbin to St. Louis, Songbin doesn't get this call up. He doesn't. I don't think he gets the call up, and it's not a secret. It's no surprise that 2022 was the last time he had a call up, when he was last consistently playing around that time and allowed to succeed. And now that he has this opportunity with St. Louis, he gets a call up. I make that correlation. I think it's a valid one to make. So props to Lutz for bringing him in and making this happen. Now, the unfortunate thing I was mentioning, because Songbin gets this call up, he's obviously not available for this weekend's match against FC Dallas. In my mind, that would open up an opportunity for Mekhi Joyner to immediately slot in potentially and see significant minutes, maybe on the left side while Hartle slides over to the right or central. It allows Mekhi Joyner an opportunity, but with Mekhi Joyner being himself with the U20s, the U.S. national team, that's not going to happen. So one of the conversations and one of the topics and the storylines that we're going to be following against FC Dallas this weekend is the starting 11 and how the attack will look different, not just to start the match, but into the second half will look vastly different. And it'll be interesting to see how that depth looks and who gets a few more minutes between Salio, Simon Betcher, anyone else, Tomas Ostrak, see if he gets a longer run out. Then we'll talk about that one here in just a minute. Before we get into that, though, there's a lot of, I would say, obvious frustration going on around the St. Louis City side. There's a lot of also apathy, I think, going on about the St. Louis City side. And part of that is the biggest, that is, I think, in my opinion, the biggest storyline that's currently going on with St. Louis City is the lack of direction, apathy by fans, frustration by fans, and it really is a big deal because there's no discernible path forward at this moment. There's no certainty. There's no clarity. We are very much living in the most nebulous time that we ever have for St. Louis City. We don't have a known direction that we're going to. And part of this has directly to do with the players that are on our roster and the uncertainty around half of the roster, but also what are we going to look like and what is the direction that we're going to have in putting together the roster for next season. So what are we still playing for at this point? Well, it's players playing for contracts. It's the pride of not winning the wooden spoon. The performances like last week are going to annoy, frustrate, and aggravate to no end guys like Diego Gigliani, John Hackworth, who are trying to build this roster, trying to take what exists from this club and have some nucleus that they can build off of that is showing quality. And the unfortunate thing, I think, is that it'll be a storyline that I mentioned in a little bit too, is that if you really dive into a lot of the games that we've been playing, Vancouver and Houston notable in their recency, we're not as bad of a team as it seems. We have those few mistakes, but those few mistakes are consistently being made. So however we decide to build this roster, those few mistakes need to be addressed, figuring out what's the root cause of them, how can they be fixed, and in what way can you do it? Is it bringing on different players? Is it a different head coach? Is it a slightly different style of play? Because overall, some of the stats that I'm going to say may shock you here in a little bit in how positive I'm able to be. So while we call this episode Searching for Optimism, I found it in a few different ways, but it's how you get that to be the most consistent aspect of this team and their play, and how you get that to be the overarching story, as opposed to allowing set piece goals, committing penalties, scoring own goals, having your $4 million player just give the ball up in the attacking third for a goal. How you minimize those and how you accentuate the positives. So in looking to accentuate the positives, you're looking for the building blocks for next year. And it's tough to look at what most people consider as a dumpster fire of a year, looking for any redeeming qualities. But a lot of it starts with the players, because you don't have any consistency possible right now with the decision makers, I would argue. David Critchley is not playing himself into this job. He's got a 3-9-1 record. And while the underlying metrics might look good and he could sell it well, and I'm a believer in a lot of what that means, the results speak for themselves. And you can't have positive underlying numbers with horribly negative results and expect to keep a job, much less win a job. So with those unknowns being the sporting director, the head coach, probably the assistant coaching staff, and half the players, we look to the player contract situations, and we're going to keep focusing on this as a reminder of who is in what bucket. So of those players who have contracts expiring in 2025 with options, so this is the group that John Hackworth will be making decisions on. That's Klaus, Chris Durkin, Songbin Zhang, Henry Kessler, Rasmus Alm, Alfredo Morales, Christian Oliveras, Haziel Orozco, Jay Reed, Akil Watts, Michael Wenzel, Josh Yarrow, Joey Zielinski, and Miguel Perez. That's 14 players of our 31-man roster who have options for next year, but their contracts are up. Now, we also have 2 contracts expiring in 2025 with no options, and that's our goalkeeping core of Roman Berkey and Ben Lund. We have 2 loans that are up this year in Conrad Vollum and Devin Padelford. And we do have a little bit of a nucleus of a team going forward, but it goes back to the question of, is this the nucleus you want to build with? And are you even able to make this many moves and decisions without potentially putting some of these players on the hot seat? Because this group consists of Marcel Hartl, Jake Girdwood-Reich, Falou Fall, Edu Leuven, Tomas Ostrak, Timo Baumgartel, Simon Betcher, Kyle Hebert, Celio Pompeu, Thomas Totland, Caden Glover, Mackay Joyner, Tyson Pierce, and that's it. So you've got 13 total players under contract through at least 2026, 1 designated player, 2 U22s, 2 TAM level players, 5 other senior rostered, and 3 homegrown players. You expect that if you're going to turn over the roster, it be with the players who have contracts expiring, but that kind of gives a pass to everybody that we have under contract. And I think in an ideal world, that would be doing a disservice to this team as you look to improve. You would be looking to sell potentially some of these players, but there's so much to juggle about this team, that how you put together the pieces of this shambolic season and borderline shambolic 2 seasons, how you put together those pieces with the roster and the decisions you have at hand, that's a Herculean task. And that leads to a lot of the uncertainty and the apathy and the concern about the future and where this club heads. So that's long-term storyline. That's big picture stuff. Let's pare it down a little bit. And you're listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS as we get ready to pare it down and preview FC Dallas. FC Dallas is an interesting opponent on this one. City is 2-3-1 all time against FC Dallas. That's 2 wins, 3 losses, and a draw, with the last match being a 3-0 loss to Dallas that everybody wants to forget. At the time, we, myself included, thought that it was the worst loss under David Critchley. It came on the heels of a good win against Portland back in July, so we wanted that momentum, and it was the second opportunity I think we had to create a winning streak, and we failed miserably. It's been just 7 weeks since we last played them. The biggest difference, I think, in general, if you had to boil it down to what we played last time, I think is the absence of Lucho Acosta, who had been sold, and we'll touch on that in just a minute, since we last played them. So this is the third time that David Critchley has played a team twice. The first was Portland, a loss and then a win. Last week was the second time he's played Houston, both losses. And now he's trying to win with this version of a rubber match, whatever you want to call it, where it's the third time he's played a team twice, trying to get the win on this one. FC Dallas comes into this match 12th in the West with a 7-11-9 record, 30 points in 27 matches, 39 goals scored, 47 goals allowed for a -8 goal differential, and they are 4-3-6 away. This is, oddly enough, the second time in 2 weeks that we're going to be playing the 12th place team in the West after Houston was last week. They've moved up to 10th place. FC Dallas has had a unbeaten streak, to borrow a City 2 term, in their last 3 matches. They had a bye week last week, so let's get that out of the way, that FC Dallas is very fresh, very rested. Their last match was a 1-1 draw against LAFC 2 weeks ago. They had a 1-1 draw against Austin before that at Austin, and a 2-0 win against Portland in Frisco, Texas. Some of the trends for FC Dallas lately is that they have not been shut out since July 13th, the match before us. The 6 matches in that time frame, they have not been shut out. And they're in 12th place now with this more recent streak of unbeaten. It's notable that they're in 12th place thanks to 4 different streaks of at least 3 matches winless in a row. This has included a 4-match losing streak and a separate 6-match winless streak. So this team, prior to the last few matches, has really struggled to find consistency, not unlike St. Louis City has as well. Now, Dallas is going to be without some players. They've got a couple injuries, as listed a couple weeks ago, the last time they had an injury report made public. Martin Paz, upper leg hamstring injury. He was expected to be out, but he was also called up on international duty to Indonesia. So that plays into this, and he's said to not be able to compete because of an injury. So we're not expecting Martin Paz to be able to play. Their top goalkeeper is out. Paxton Pomykal, he has a knee injury. Looks like he'll be out. He had knee surgery in 2024. He came back for 3 matches in May, but he's been out since. And all reports that I can find show that he hasn't been practicing enough or often enough to likely play. So I'm anticipating Paxton Pomykal will be out as well. The rest of their outages are due to international duty call-ups. Manuel Cafamana, midfielder to Angola. Patrickson Delgado, this is a big one, midfielder to Ecuador. And the aforementioned Martin Paz to Indonesia, with Carl Saint, midfielder to Haiti. Not massive names. I would say Patrickson Delgado, one of their midfielders who acts as a central midfielder, deeper lying, and helps to direct their play. That's probably going to be their biggest outage outside of the goalkeeping. For Dallas, biggest storyline, their playoff push. Dallas is 5 points behind San Jose with 2 games in hand, and they're behind Houston by 2 with a game in hand, and RSL by 1 with 2 games in hand. So 12th place, seeking to be 9th place. It's a really short, the bottom line here is just a few games separate all of these teams, all 3-4 of these teams. The biggest thing for Dallas is that they have games in hand. And that's the thing that they're going to be having the advantage over the next few weeks. Very much fighting for their 2025 lives. They have 7 matches left, and they're all going to be critical, home or away. So Dallas has that extra piece to be fighting for, unlike St. Louis, who, while not yet mathematically eliminated, I believe, is eliminated from the playoffs. There's no sugarcoating it. We're 14th in the West, 21 points on a 5-17-6 record in 28 matches, 33 goals scored, 50 goals allowed, -17 goal differential, and we're just 4-6-4 at home. The biggest thing is we're 3-9-1 under David Critchley. We are on a 3-match losing streak, having lost all 3 of those matches 3-2 to Houston, Vancouver, and Chicago since we last defeated Nashville 3-0. And if you're looking at the trends, here's where I think I can get a little positivity going. Here's where I think I found the optimism in this whole searching for that amidst everything else going on. Stay with me on some of this. We have more losses this year than last year. Okay, that's not good. But if you're looking for a silver lining, we might still have a chance to have fewer goals allowed this year than last year when all is said and done. 50 goals allowed with 6 games left this year compared to 63 goals allowed in 2024. Now, these are a lot of goals allowed. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it's not as bad. We got to shore it up. We can't keep allowing 3 goals a game, but it's still attainable. 13 goals allowed or less in 6 games. That's very attainable. You also can't say there isn't goal-scoring fireworks happening under David Critchley. We've only been shut out twice in 13 matches under Critchley and have 9 goals in our last 4 matches. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. stay with me on this one. I know this is a massively small sample size, but on the goal scoring front, if you take these last 4 matches, so Nashville, Chicago, Vancouver, and Houston, and you compare that to season-long goals per game averages in Major League Soccer, we're ahead of every other team. Inter Miami leads Major League Soccer in goals per game with 2.16, with 54 goals in 25 matches. San Diego and Orlando also have 54 goals in 29 games for San Diego and 28 games for Orlando. But that's at least something positive to remember, that our goal scoring pedigree is actually becoming consistent lately and elite in MLS. If we can continue this, or at least use this as the trendsetter. Now, if you stretch it out a little bit more, it's still really good. So I talked about the last 4 games. That's a very small sample size. But if you stretch it out a little bit more to our last 8 games, we have 15 goals in our last 8 games. One of those we were shut out in. Over half of Critchley's tenure is in that span. So that matches what San Diego and Orlando were on in 8 games for us, if you compare it to the season-long average goals per game for San Diego and Orlando. That's top 2, 3 in Major League Soccer over our last 8 games compared to season-long averages for everyone else. That's a lot of consistent goal-scoring threat from St. Louis City. So if you're looking for a positive, if you're looking for something to hang your hat on, and kind of why we've seen consistency in the attack from David Critchley in what he chooses to employ, it's because we've been creating elite goal scoring compared to Major League Soccer, compared to all teams. We're on Inter Miami level of goal scoring in our last 4, and we're on San Diego, Orlando level of goal scoring in our last 8. That's notable. And it can't go unsaid in the whole concept of the frustrating season, the mental mistakes, the individual issues. That is a positive that St. Louis has to build off of. Other storylines that we're following are just what we're playing for. Talked about that. Players for next year. Has the ship sailed on David Critchley? He's got the goal scoring going. Hasn't found the balance yet. Players are having these mental mistakes. There's uncertainty with the sporting director job. One of the other biggest storylines, though, is the disappearance of Thomas Totland. Thomas Totland hasn't played since the last time we played FC Dallas and has seemingly fallen to 3rd on the right back depth chart. We started talking about this here recently in the past few weeks, but Conrad Vollum is absolutely being favored over Thomas Totland right now, and Jaziel Orozco was favored before that. Chris Durkin was kind of even favored with the game state we saw against Houston in a hybrid 3 center back role on the right side at times when we were in our buildup. So you're just not seeing him not only favored with current game states and with the model that we have, but even with like players, essentially with Conrad Vollum in the quality they have in their touches and ability to get into the final third. He's not favored in that conversation as well. That's concerning for 2 reasons. One, because Thomas Totland is under contract with us for next year and Conrad Vollum is not. But also it's concerning for what it means to Thomas Totland, the confidence he has mentally, and whatever is driving this decision that's occurring in training, no doubt, is a storyline that we're probably going to unfortunately have to follow into the offseason unless something changes in this last 6. Another positive, though, for St. Louis is the health and availability. So we're going to be without Song Bin Jong. We're going to be without Makai Joyner. We may still be without Cedric Toyshirt. He's the only big question mark, it seems, an otherwise healthy lineup besides him, who we've been missing for the past few weeks. That's at least good, as we still have our depth to hang our hat on. Midweek this past week, or last weekend for City 2, I think it was only Michael Wenzel that played. That was a City contracted player. So that's something that St. Louis will have and probably draw a little bit more from their depth. But by missing 2 attackers, it is also not outside the realm of possibility that we may pull up somebody from City 2 who is in form. Somebody like a Brendan McSorley, somebody, I would say Caden Glover, but I got nothing on that one. Missing 2 attackers is different than bringing in an Akil Watts, bringing in a Kyle Hebert, who haven't been making the matchday roster. So that's why I mentioned we may see a call up from City 2 as a possibility just for the attack. Now, if we dive in a little bit more to FC Dallas, finding out strengths, weaknesses, what style of play they have in some of the remaining minutes that we have before we get into our starting 11 and some questions I'm following for St. Louis City, we look at Dallas's counterattacking ability. They've got a massively efficient counterattack under head coach Eric Quill. They have a low possession counterattacking style that leverages speed on the wings. And we saw this 7 weeks ago. The FC Dallas has the 2nd lowest average possession in Major League Soccer with 42.3%. and they were effective in doing this against St. Louis City 7 weeks ago. Wingbacks stretch the opposition. So St. Louis, when they roll out their 4-2-3-1 or drop another player into the midfield, it's the wings that they're going to have to worry about. They've got players like their defensive midfielders like Kayak and Patrickson Delgado, who is on international duty, typically body around the midfield while the wingers move up. But the team excels at absorbing pressure. That's the biggest thing, is that St. Louis had difficulty breaking down Houston. They're likely to have difficulty breaking down Dallas as they want to absorb pressure. They'll want to give St. Louis possession of the ball, and then they'll want to get on the break quickly. They utilize Peter Musa and Logan Farrington very effectively. And in the past few games, they haven't even had to rely on Lucho Acosta, who was sold, to have an effective buildup. Peter Musa in particular, since he was signed from Benfica in 2024, is still massive focal point in their attack, still playing at a high level. He capitalizes on chances inside the penalty area. He is effective in transition. Not unlike Klaus in a couple of those ways, Musa's been just more effective as a goal scorer. 13 goals and 6 assists this season, leads FC Dallas in both of those categories. Lucho Acosta, who was sold a few weeks ago to Brazilian side Fluminense, reportedly 3.4 million euro transfer, was second on the team in goals and in assists at the time, but Logan Farrington is no slouch as well. 5 goals from Logan. Anderson Julio has 4. That rounds up the current top 3 for Dallas. And Dallas has shown grit in their comebacks. They've earned 12 points so far from losing positions this year and have a 2-4-3 record when conceding first. So it's not great, but they're still able to get points, able to come back in some of these areas. Kind of indicates a little better mental toughness and fortitude compared to what we've seen from St. Louis City by and large when Dallas concedes first versus St. Louis. Some of the weaknesses for FC Dallas are their inconsistent defensive depth, injuries, inefficient play, center back pairings of Lalas Abubakar and Sebastian Ibiega. It's a little below standard for a lot of teams that look to be in the playoffs. So they've brought in like Marco Farfan to fill in as a third center back at times to prevent some of these vulnerabilities from being exposed. They have an issue with generating sufficient scoring opportunities. So, for instance, their last match against LAFC, they only had 10 shots with 2 on target. So for a team like FC Dallas that prides themselves on low possession, hitting on the counter, and generating quality chances in the few and far between moments that they actually possess the ball, having 10 shots with only 2 on target goes completely counter to that. They're all about quality over quantity when it comes to movements into the final third. And if they're not effective at generating shots on target in those few chances they break on the counter, they're going to struggle. And so that lack of precision, the low shot output, leading to low conversion rates, that's a recipe for disaster for FC Dallas. And that's what St. Louis has to work on. That's something St. Louis needs to make sure that they do, is if they force Dallas to the wings, if they clog up the central areas and prevent these shot on goal opportunities, prevent these high shot percentage chances, they're going to be in good shape. Injury concerns to the midfield, international duties, that could play a factor. You've got key players like Sebastian Lletget, Paxton Pomykal. They've had injuries throughout the time, so we know Pomykal probably isn't going to go. Sebastian Lletget might not even be 90 minutes fit anymore. And you have Delgado out on international duty. So the midfield could be a weakness and the depth could be tested for FC Dallas. Now, their preferred formation, if you didn't catch it from when I was describing it, is usually a 3-4-3 or a 3-5-2, moving away from this 5-man back line, and they use wingbacks a lot higher up the field and a lot wider. They leverage the wingback play, a compact midfield that facilitates their counterattacks. Wingbacks will stretch the field while their central midfielders, they try to create the chaos in the central areas. They clog it up. They'll act more defensive minded, but don't pay attention as much to a lot of the FB ref, for instance, 4-3-3s, 4-2-3-1s. It's been a 3 center back look. That's their primary setup. So it would not surprise me in the slightest if they go with the 3 center backs. Look for Dallas to be that low possession counterattacking team. Look for Dallas to be solid defensively and create quick transitions. And look for Dallas to utilize their midfielders for control and to create chaos. The positive for St. Louis is their midfield depth will be tested because, like I mentioned, Patrickson Delgado, Paxton Pomykal, Sebastian Lletget, those kind of players, if Lletget plays, he won't go 90. Patrickson Delgado's out. Paxton Pomykal is probably out. That's an advantage for St. Louis, is their midfield compared to St. Louis, who we have in Edu Leuven and Chris Durkin and Alfredo Morales and Tomas Ostrak with Marcel Hartl, all able to play those central midfield areas into the attack. I like St. Louis chances if I were to start comparing different positions to each other. Peter Musa is, though, without a doubt, the player to watch for Dallas. Their wingbacks, their midfielders, they are all supporting cast. It's the Peter Musa story. So if you shut down Peter Musa, you likely shut down FC Dallas. Now, with the last few minutes that we have, I want to look at a few questions for St. Louis going into this match. You are listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker, and let's finish this show looking at FC Dallas by saying some of my biggest questions for St. Louis are, can they bounce back and start strong after conceding 3 goals first to Houston last week? That hurts. Will our set piece defense finally show up? We've been leaking goals that way. That is, if you're going to take pride in your goal scoring ability, set piece defense, committing penalties, and individual mental mistakes that include an own goal and a giveaway, those cannot happen. And they can't, if they happen, they have to be minimized in the sense that somebody has to pick them up. If we shore up those dead ball opportunities, we shore up the penalties conceded, the corners, the set pieces, those mental mistakes, honestly, I think we would look like a really good soccer team. With how we've been playing otherwise, with our goal scoring prowess, and yes, it is goal scoring prowess here in the last 4 to 8 games, I think we shore these issues up, we find solutions to them, we do end up looking like a really good soccer team. If you want to take some kind of momentum into the offseason, you figure that out. That's how you create the balance. And you go into the offseason with this body of work where you could potentially go in with 14 games in being one of the best goals per game teams in Major League Soccer. You fix the other issues and you have something to work with. That's the recipe for success for St. Louis. In this individual match, should we look for City to dominate field, tilt, and possession? No. It seems likely, or I'm sorry, yes, but we seem likely for Dallas to have low possession counterattack based on City's focus on winning field tilt. So in City's search these last few games for field tilt and possession, it's been their desire to dominate this, but do it efficiently. That's going to be the trick. Is Dallas is going to let City dominate possession. They're probably going to let them dominate field tilt with how St. Louis has been operating, and Dallas will drop into the lower block looking to hit on the counter. But the question is, can City translate that field tilt into quality shot opportunities? We really couldn't against Houston, and I'm worried that Dallas is going to have a similar look in how they clog those areas up before they break to the wings. Will City be able to actually break through that and translate the field tilt and the possession to quality shot opportunities? And then will they be able to convert those opportunities? Last week, the Klaus miss, I watch it on replay in my mind because it's so egregious in the opportunity that was in front of him. But we had multiple other opportunities we didn't convert. And we shot wide. We didn't have the final touch that we needed. So that's a concern. But the other big storyline in this one is going to be, how will City look without Songbin Jong? Songbin Jong has been a mainstay and a staple since his first match against Minnesota. He has arguably changed our attack for the better and has really added a dimension to St. Louis in their build on the right side that we really only ever had in promise with Rasmus Alm for a period of time. I don't think it's any coincidence that some of the stats that I had as far as our goal scoring prowess have occurred under the time of Songbin Jong being a member of St. Louis City. Since Jong joined us against Minnesota, we have had some really quality goal scoring opportunities. And that's 4 or 5 matches that we have as part of this 8-match stretch of being elite in goals scored per game. So without Songbin this weekend, will we see Thomas Totland start? Thomas Totland hasn't started without Songbin, and if he does, well, I can only tell you the conversations that we're going to be looking to have on why Critchley won't play Totland with Songbin, but it's definitely something I'm going to be thinking about and watching for when that lineup comes out. Tots hasn't started a match since Songbin's arrival, so what will Critchley change to try and keep that right side consistency without Songbin Jong? Last question for St. Louis for me is, will Falou Fall start? You've gotten to a point where Critchley said last week he'll be in contention. He made a big mistake last week in the time that he came on. I worry about his mental edge, the mental wellness, essentially, of Falou Fall if he doesn't start to get these opportunities. If he's not shown trust that he's the current and long-term plan for City at center back, And part of it is, I know we have depth with Timo Baumgartel and Henry Kessler, but there has to come a time. There has to come a tipping point where you didn't have you had another 3 goals allowed, but you can argue that they weren't in the run of play on a set defense. The giveaway by Fall, the own goal by Kessler. The excuses are what they are and why you might stay with Timo Baumgartel and Henry Kessler. You could obviously have an argument for it, but at the same time, Fall deserves a chance to start. So that leads into my prediction for the starting 11. And I do have Fall in there. I have Roman Berkey, Devin Padelford, Fall, Henry Kessler, and Conrad Wallem as my back line. Keeping Conrad Wallem in, I haven't. Thomas Totland starting is going to have to be, I'll see it to believe it story with David Critchley at this point. His words have not backed up anything about Thomas Totland being favored or even above Haziel Orozco on right back consideration. And so it's frustrating. I don't have an answer for it other than it's something in training that David Critchley has seen that Thomas Totland just hasn't been in form. He hasn't impressed. And so we continue to seek answers on that. So that's my back line. It's my keeper. I've got Chris Durkin and Edu Leuven as my central midfielders. My attack in absence of Song Bin, I don't know on what side they might be on, but I think I'd put Salio on the left, Ulstrock and Hartl, one in the middle, one on the right, and then Klaus up top. It's going to be a different look. You just don't, and we knew this from before Song Bin came. You don't have that speed on the right side without Song Bin Jong. There's nobody in the depth chart, in my opinion, that can really fill that hole. So you look to change things up. You maximize your strengths. You can still have speed and quality on the ball in the final third. Have it on the left side with Salio. Change it up just a little bit and give him a chance. This would be Salio's first time starting since July 26th against Minnesota. So he himself has not had a big run of it in quite a while. I think that about sums it up. Chris Durkin for Alfredo Morales, it could go either way. I think you're looking at a fairly similar profile in what you're looking for in the defensive midfield either way. I do kind of like how Durkin can get higher up a little bit better than Alfredo Morales, and that may benefit in the weakened midfield by FC Dallas. So we'll see. My scoreline prediction for this one is a 3-2 win by St. Louis. I still think St. Louis comes out and figures out how to score goals. The big question, though, is will we be able to score these goals without Song Bin Jong? That still has yet to be proven, and this will be a good case study of how important Song Bin is to the creation and the opportunities that we have, and if we can keep the goal-scoring threat consistent even without him. This could be a litmus test for some of the depth that we have behind Song Bin, and it will also be an interesting case study in how important it will be to re-sign Song Bin Jong next season, pick up his option. It almost goes without saying and how important he's been for St. Louis that we should be doing that. But because it's an option, the question continues to persist. That's it for me on Flyover Footy. I think we covered just about everything leading into FC Dallas. Hopefully that whetted your appetite a little bit from the fallout that we missed after the Houston game. And I think it was enough looking at that. Plenty of news, plenty of positive news on the national team front this weekend. So enjoy the U.S. national team game as they play South Korea on Saturday. Enjoy City's game that you're about to listen to if you're listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS on Saturday night. And hopefully we have a positive fallout to look for, me and Santi, on Sunday, because we will be here for that. Tune into YouTube, our Flyover Footy YouTube, and our podcast wherever you get that. Appreciate you listening to us this week on Flyover Footy. Enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you later.